Today is our Harvest Festival, a time to give thanks for all that we have, and, if we're in a position to share what we have with others. Harvest Festival has also become, in more recent times, a time to acknowledge the great gift of God's creation and recommit ourselves to its care. The origin of Harvest Festival, as we know it today, doesn't go back as far as you might think. In the Middle Ages, the Church's Harvest Festival was called Lammas, meaning loaf mass. It was held on the 1st of August, before the harvest had properly started, and it was celebrated in villages, with each farmer contributing one sheaf of corn to make the flour that went into one huge loaf. But with the Industrial Revolution, and as towns grew bigger and people moved away from villages and the land, this custom gradually died out. The modern Harvest Festival wasn't initiated until 1843 by a Victorian vicar in Cornwall called the Reverend Robert Stephen Hawker. Hawker was, incidentally, also a poet and enthusiastic opium user, and a bit of an eccentric. Ministering in a village and a fan of the old customs, Hawker was aware of the life and death importance of harvest to his parishioners. In September 1843, he declared, "God has been very merciful to us this year. He hath filled our garners with increase and satisfied our poor with bread. Let us offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving." Everyone was invited to bring their produce to the service as a way of saying thank you to God. And this initiated what we now think of as the traditional English Harvest Festival. Victorian hymns such as "We Plough the Fields and Scatter," which we sang as we came in, "Come ye thankful people come," and "All things bright and beautiful," helped popularise this idea of harvest thanksgiving. And the custom of decorating churches with local produce became widespread. In the amazing harvest displays you see around you today, each gift traditionally represented a thank you for the food that has grown during the summer and which will keep the population fed during the coming winter. Even today, Harvest Festival probably still ranks in the popular imagination as one of the Church's important annual occasions. It would be easy, though, to question the relevance of this historic festival. In modern times, far fewer people live or work on farms. Most of us, despite occasionally seeing reports about farmers in the media and about how difficult things are for them, are only dimly aware of what actually goes on in the farms we walk or drive past, or are able to say whether this year has seen a good harvest or a bad one. When we think of farmers, or when we think of key workers, farmers are not the first people who come to mind, even though as producers of our food, this is exactly what they are. But harvest, I think, is more relevant than ever, even if our awareness of it locally doesn't now stretch much further than the wide variety of produce we see on our supermarket shelves. The war in Ukraine made us all aware earlier this year of the major role Ukraine plays in the global food supply, contributing from its harvests 42% of the world's sunflower oil, 16% of the maize, and 9% of the wheat. The inability of Ukrainian farmers to export their produce meant that many in countries who depend heavily upon it, such as Ethiopia or Afghanistan, faced starvation. And in our climate-conscious times, while we may not be so aware of the results of the harvests in this country, we are aware that drier weather means harvests in many other parts of the world, if not yet our own, means that yields of many crops have been low. And the cost of living crisis reminds us that with rising prices, it's not just people in other parts of the world who may be struggling to feed themselves and to get enough in the coming winter. Our focus in modern harvests has moved away from the farm, away from the land, away from the fruits of the earth, and more to matters such as government policy, climate change, and international global concerns and negotiations. But that doesn't make it any less meaningful, or any less meaningful to give thanks for what we have. On the contrary, it reminds us not to take it for granted. At Harvest, we reaffirm and recultivate the Christian virtue of thankfulness. Through the symbolism of the land and the fruits of the earth, we remember to give thanks. The purpose of today is not to get too caught up in the nostalgia of Robert Hawker's first harvest, but rather to pause and say thank you for all the good things that have come our way this year, and to think about what giving thanks really entails. Thankfulness is an attitude central to Christian belief. In our first reading, Paul writes, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." There might seem to be an awful lot to worry about in society and the world just now. But Paul, writing from prison, urges the new Christian community at Philippi to rejoice even in hardship and to be thankful. That doesn't mean being excessively cheerful or falsely optimistic, some Pollyanna-like pretense that all is sweetness and light, but something much deeper. Thanksgiving is both an attitude and a response, both faith and actions. To pray, Paul says, is to ask God about every area of life. Prayer like this will mean that God's peace, not a stoic lack of concern, but deep peace in the middle of life's problems and storms, will keep guard around your heart and mind, like a squadron of soldiers looking after a treasure chest. The command in the second half of the Philippians reading to think about all the wonderful and lovely things that Paul lists in it, and which we see a visual display of around us in the floral tributes in the cathedral this morning, is not to deny the horrors we see in the news day by day, but to remind ourselves of God's good, beautiful, and diverse world, and to recommit ourselves to keeping it that way. Paul reminds his readers to keep on doing these things, a reminder that thanks without giving, without sharing or action, is no thanks at all. This is the highest of ethical commands. Just as the ancient Hebrews were told to offer the first fruits of the land to the priest and leave the remnants for the poor and the stranger in their midst, so the harvest of righteousness, of which Paul speaks earlier in the letter, is not complete if it's kept only to the Philippians themselves. Gratitude without sharing is no gratitude at all. Everyone knows how important it is to affirm the people around us and to thank them for who they are and what they do. To give thanks to God this morning, our Harvest Festival, is to reclaim the attitude and actions expressed in the ancient Hebrew celebration of Sukkot, the Jewish harvest festival, which rejoiced in the harvest and remembered the needs of the poor and the stranger. And so let us thank God for life, thank God for food, family and friends, thank God for the opportunities he gives us, and thank God for being able to express our gratitude in acts of love, sharing and giving. Amen.